Hey, everybody. Welcome back to the Disciple Makers podcast. Man, we are so excited to have Dave Buehring with us with LionShare. You guys are in for a treat. We're in the middle of a series right now where we're really highlighting Discipleship.org partners. And Dave, we are so thrilled to have you, man, and get to hear a little bit about your story and a little bit about what LionShare is up to and how it might be able to help our listeners out there. But let me just give you a few minutes in order to kind of introduce yourself. We'd love to hear about you, your hearts, and let's hear about Dave, and then we can hear about LionShare.
Okay, so kind of the immediate is I'm married, hitting 42 years this year. We've got 2 adult kids who are 40 and 38, 4 grandkids. They all
Wait, you've been married 42 years?
Yep.
Dude, you do not look like you've been married 42 years, bro.
Well,
Get on you,
man. You're kind. Yeah, and we've got 4 grandkids who are between 4 and 10. So we're, and they're all here where we live in the Nashville area. So we're very grateful for that. So I grew up in a very godly home. I had one of those 4:30 in the morning intercessory prayer moms. So I realized that much of who I'm become today is just answers to a mom that sought the Lord. I watched my dad leave business when I was about 12 or 13 years of age and go back to Bible college. He was just so hungry to grow that he left business, jumped in. We moved from where we lived in San Diego back to Minnesota, where my mom and dad were both from, so that he could go to school. Mom had to go get a job. I was going into 9th grade, my brother into 7th grade. So it was a whole family adventure that we took together. And that helped shaped my probably flexibility and realizing, okay, sometimes God just says we're doing this, and you roll with it. And following high school, I spent 7 years with Youth with a Mission, if people are familiar with YWAM. And so I met my wife there. She was also doing missionary work.
Didn't know you were a YWAMer, Dave. There you go.
Yeah.
Great.
So and I still a couple weeks from now I'll be speaking at YWAM Pittsburgh. So about 3 weeks of the year I still just contribute back to the mission. And one of the things that was really significant for me was the founder of Youth of the Mission, a man by the name of Lauren Cunningham, who just passed away last year. He really poured into me. He discipled me and kind of took me under his wing. And it was a really great building upon some foundations I had in my childhood. And so we spent the next 7 years there in Kona, married Cheryl. Our son Ryan was born there. And it was a season of doing campus ministry work, and we started seeing God doing all kinds of things on high school campuses on the Big Island of Hawaii, and we'd pull the new believers together, and we'd begin to really disciple them, and we'd pour into them. And it was during that season and time that I just began to learn a lot about discipleship, what was important, what was maybe on the fringes, you could take it or leave it, what was stuff that you could really accelerate someone's growth. And for me, because of that heritage, things like godly character, how do you develop godly character became a massive important thing. And for me, it was based on we've got to know God's character and we've got to know his ways. And so much of what we have done with discipleship spins around those two things. And so over the years after that, we spent some time pastoring. I spent some time in the mission world where I had, from 91 to 95, 11 trips in and out of Russia, where when Russia opened up, we kind of hit that running. And so some missions background, there was probably about 20 some years of pastoring. And then we jumped full time in 2006 into the LionShare leadership group. We were about 5 years old at that time. And it was when I just knew I need to jump in.
Yeah, that's awesome, man. Well, so you went from like Hawaii all over and then to Russia. I mean, Hawaii, that's a tough mission field, but somebody's got to do it,
That's the way I've always thought about it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Lord, if you want to call me, I guess I could go.
Yeah.
And so, no, that's awesome, bro. I've got so many friends that have, grown up in and been sent through YWAM, and what an incredible ministry, man, honestly.
Yeah.
And so obviously, Lauren pouring into you, discipling you, and then you getting a chance to really live that out and go after that. What a beautiful story, man. That's so good. And so as you got involved in LionShare, tell us a little bit and our listeners about LionShare. What made you jump into that? And
Yeah.
kind of what's kind of the laser focus and heartbeat of the ministry?
Yeah. So up to that point in time, I had spent a lot of time pastoring. And then in my own life, sometimes, well, of course, with people in our church, but there was also just as many outside of our church I found myself discipling. And a lot of them were leaders in society. They were in business, arts, government, media, education, etc. And with my YWAM orientation, YWAM has often used the phrase "the spheres of society," and so ever since I was 18, that has been like a grid for me. And so in my disciple making, I've not only seen the effectiveness of it and what happens when a local church buys in and goes after it, but I also have found when you find people who are business leaders who then are discipled and they go, how can I do this? And there's a guy in our life who up in Pittsburgh, he has in his office a literal space that is dedicated to disciple making. And so he invites other business leaders in who love Jesus but have never had it. And he
That's
begins
awesome.
to grow them in God's character, teach them God's ways, not only in their lives and relationships, but also as it relates to their vocation. So for example, he might do something like this with business people, where the question is asked, hey, what's your bottom line? And when you ask a business person that, they're going to give you a number like, well, this year it was 750,000, last year it was 5. And if I'm doing that, I'll just let them kind of go a little bit and I'll say, no, that's not what I'm looking for. I'm looking for, as a person who is a business owner, why do you do what you do? And we get into a conversation about things like what the business world calls customer service. And I say, do you know that's actually a biblical concept? But where we have to make the tweak is oftentimes you guys as business people will use this to make sure that everything's nice and neat in the store and people treat each other so that you can keep getting business. When the real motive, a godly motive would be, I want to serve people well. And then I'll tell them if you serve people well, they'll come back and drink at your well. And so in our LionShare leadership group roles, we just started to see this need of people in what some would call the broader marketplace being developed in the ways of God. And a conviction I've had, I know there's no way to fully prove this, but I believe that one of the reasons our country is in the condition that it is in is because we have not made disciples, and not only kind of in our traditional intentionality in church life, but also within the spheres of society. So we don't have godly business leaders.
Yeah.
We have more
Right.
of them than others, but we don't have, like, we're in an election year. Wouldn't it
Yeah.
be nice to know that you're casting a vote for somebody that you see walks in humility, they're obedient to the Lord, you can tell the way they treat people's incredible. It's those kinds of things. And so it's one of the aims that we have is raising up not only current leaders, but we spend a lot of time with next gen 20s and 30 somethings, helping older ones invest in them. So by the time they get into their 40s, they're way ahead of us.
Yeah, that's great. I heard somebody say recently the election wouldn't matter nearly as much if the elect did their job well.
That's a
Yeah, and
great way
so,
to say it. That's a
so
great way to say it.
I thought that was a good line. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
And so, but no, and you're right on. So with LionShare, then is your main focus then basically on helping people in different spheres of society become disciples and then make more disciples? Would you say that's kind of a main heartbeat of what you guys are doing?
Yes, and I would say probably a third of our time would be spent working with churches and pastors and coming alongside of them, and two-thirds would be in these other segments of society. So we kind of view the church as a vocation, as one of what we kind of have as a dozen umbrellas of vocations. And so, for example, in light of what we were just talking about, one of our umbrellas is we call it government, law, and nation security. So that would include government, politics, lawyers, attorneys, fire, police, military. That kind of is an umbrella. And so, we walk with people there, like one of the guys that we've walked with in this, who's part of our team and some of the things we do, is the former chaplain for the Pentagon. Another one, he was number 2 in Homeland Security for the security of the Postal Service, and has just recently retired in his mid-50s, and now he's actually on our board. And so you have, we kind of lump them under umbrellas. We have like arts, entertainment, sports, media. So you've kind of got all that. So living here in Nashville, we've got folks who we work with there, but you have, leaders in society throughout our country in those areas. So, so that's the kind of the way that we approach it. So I'd say on a practical level for LionShare, a third of our time would be focused on churches and probably 2/3 on these other segments of society.
Yeah, that's great, Dave. And what a beautiful thing to dream about. I want to challenge your listeners, as you're listening to Dave talk and as we're having this conversation, what would it look like if the kingdom came into these different spheres of society? I mean, begin to dream about that. Jesus taught us to pray, Lord, your kingdom come, right? Your will be done on earth as it is in heaven.
Yeah.
I mean, Dave, wouldn't it be beautiful if the kingdom really began to grow in scale and became palatable in these different spheres of society? I mean, that's what an incredible thing. I had one of my son's best friends recently at youth group. He said that his goal in life is to go into Hollywood and basically convert Hollywood to make it glorifying to Jesus.
Yeah.
This is and one of the kids in the youth group spoke up and he said, "It's impossible." Like he's like you and because that's kind of the feeling around some of these spheres is it's like, oh, the kingdom could never penetrate that, right?
Yeah.
But we need to remember, man, like when Jesus says the gates of hell will not prevail, it's talking about the kingdom infiltrating places that look like hell or places that don't have a lot of kingdom principles, but the kingdom infiltrates those places, right?
No, that's really well said. Yeah, and I think it's like kind of a biblical foundation we'll help people with on this. We go back to the character of God, and we help people realize that, like, if you look at his character, of course you see Jesus as shepherd, and so you've got your imagery there of the pastor, right? But you also see him as father, which speaks of leadership and family. We hear this read at Christmas time, out of Isaiah, and him being King of Kings and Lord of Lords. Well, there's a government thing that God gets. He's also known as the Word. So anybody who is a communicator in any form, it's rooted in him. And so, when we spend some time, we try to go every other year or so to Hawaii and be with friends there, and you see the sunrise or the sunset there, you can't help but be blown away by the craftsmanship of God. And so a lot of the ways that we'll walk this through with people is we first attach them to the character of God in Scripture and say, do you understand that all these different vocations, or sometimes we just limit them by calling them our jobs, but the vocation actually comes from a Latin word that means calling. And that when we know that we have been uniquely made and called, like I have several friends, like something I'm just not good at is fixing cars. It's just not, I'm grateful for the Jiffy Lubes of this life, right?
You and me both, man. You and me both.
But I have some friends that are just really gifted at, the way they've been wired, the way they think, the way they can work with their hands. But that's not any less calling than a guy that's planting a church in India. And I think that's where we have to come back, and sometimes where we can deal with challenges and feel like we're swimming upstream a little bit is over the last 40 to 50 years, through some of the end times teaching, that people just kind of left society. And it's like, well, they're all going to hell. It's here in the church. Well, and part of that church piece is true, right? We know that. But we just abandoned things. And now I think we're reaping. And I think that's where the Lord has just put it in our hearts of, hey, it's not trying to transform that area. We get it. But we also realize that you said it well, that when Jesus and his kingdom and his ways come into those areas of society, it actually looks different and it can become a blessing to people.
Yeah, that's so good, man. So let's say there's a church leader out there listening right now, Dave, and they're getting a little, they're getting fired up. They're hearing about this and they're like, man, that sounds amazing. How would you walk alongside of a church leader that's got a bunch of people in their church from all different walks of life?
Yeah.
And how can they then empower their people to be kingdom witnesses, kingdom builders, in those different areas of society? How do you kind of walk somebody through that?
Yeah. And I think one of the things that it kind of catches people off a little bit, so we just have to kind of explain to them, is they kind of get the salt and light thing, which I would call evangelism in those places. What we're saying is find people who love Jesus, take them deeper into a discipleship walk and then help them begin to apply those same principles and God's ways into their vocation. And so one of the things I often say to pastors is remember that probably 95% of the people that you're speaking to on a Sunday morning are attached to those vocations. You got maybe 5% that are ministry first,
Right.
right? And so it's helping pastors recognize like this is the audience that God's already given you.
Yeah.
And so one of the thoughts that we often have for pastors is because we will lump people into small groups and different things, which is terrific. But it's have you ever considered building, whether it's community, network, whatever you'd call it, within your own church of people who operate in the same vocations? So here's our media group. Here is our another category for us. We call it agriculture, environment, zoology. So it's kind of creation, because there is something like on the political right and left, you have these extremes. And somewhere in there, there's a kingdom wisdom on how does God actually ask us to do this? And it's fun for me when I run into people that really give a rip about that and they're kingdom-eyed, right? So you have that. You've got educators, you've got all kinds of folks. And so one of the ways that we will do that is if a pastor invites us in, is we love to come build relationship with them, make sure that formational discipleship is just happening first. And we have a tool that we use called a discipleship journey that is a year-long walk where someone takes about an hour on their own and an hour in a small group where they look at how is God speaking to me through this and how do I apply this in my life so transformation can come. And as they are going through that, within each section of the tool that we have vocational questions. So as they're learning personally, then the vocational questions begin to trigger, oh, yeah, as a boss, geez, I don't think I really honor my employees. Well, how do you do that? Or
Yeah.
if you're the employee, you're asking, golly, when my boss isn't there, I talk behind his back and I'm not really honored. How do I, so it brings application to those kinds of things.
That's good. Yeah,
Yeah,
that's so good, Dave. At the end of the day, I mean, honestly, a lot of this, as I'm hearing you talk, it's crazy to me that every time we talk through disciple making or whatever, at the end of the day, it really does come to it comes back to a lordship issue. Like a lot of times, I feel like the church has guided us in a good way with great intentions to make Jesus the savior of our lives, to make
yes,
sure that our sins are forgiven and that
yep,
we're spending quiet time or whatever.
yep,
But is he Lord of your job? Is he Lord of your vocation? Is he Lord of your family? Is he Lord of your pocketbook?
yep,
Is he actually king of your entire life? Or have we
yep,
just kind of given him a little piece of us? And what you're talking about now, the image I have in my mind, man, is like you're basically helping, whether it's pastors, leaders, or people in different vocations, make Jesus the true king of every area of their heart and lives, which,
yes,
man, that's not an easy thing. Like
yeah,
it's we don't like giving over control, right?
no, no, indeed. But there's enough encouragement that we see. I think of somebody who is a daughter in the Lord to me. I walked with her for 20 years that we just lost in April, Mandisa. And she was somebody who was in our church. We built a relationship and my wife and I poured into her and she really began to catch the vision of how do I reproduce this in the lives of upcoming artists.
Hmm.
And so that became, a really core piece of her thinking. I want to model this in my life. I want to be able to point them to it. So every once in a while I'd get the call and saying, hey, how did you express this to me again? Because I need to find a way to articulate it to them. And you see that happening in that regard. When I look at some of these other areas of society, one of the guys that we work with, because of the roles that he played in society, he now has received training in EQ. And so he's really dialed into kind of our people's intelligence relationally. And now he is impacting police department after police department around our country, helping them understand that without kind of wearing his I Love Jesus t-shirt, right? But he's walking them into things of character, and they don't realize the wisdom that he's giving them is actually wisdom from God. And so when we're seeing some of these things, it's quite encouraging because you see the impact that it makes. And they keep saying, hey, would you would you jump in and do more with us? Because we like how this, and then out of relationship, he's able to, hey, like what, why are you so different? Then he's able to, you know, but
Yeah.
sometimes through our vocations, the quality in how we relate to people and the quality of whether it's your products or services, whatever you do, actually becomes the door by which people walk into your life.
Yeah, yeah, that's beautiful. I honestly, Dave, I think so often, like I've talked to church leaders all over the country who, when we're trying to encourage them, for example, and train them on how to make disciples who make disciples who make disciples, one thing that comes out pretty quickly is many of them will admit, if they're honest, man, there's no lost people in my life at all. Like
Yeah,
I'm around church people and Christian people all the time. And what we forget is that, like you said, 95% of the people in our churches are around people that are far from God all
yeah,
the time. Like
yeah,
that is their lives. And if we're
yeah,
not equipping them, releasing them, empowering them, teaching them how to bring the kingdom to where they live, work, and play, then we're missing out on,
yeah,
a large percentage of society.
yeah,
And these are people that may never listen to a guy like me or you or a pastor who's in full-time ministry, but they will listen to the guy they work beside every day. They
yeah,
will, that like they're able to impact their coworkers and fellow students and fellow people around them
yeah,
way better than people in church leadership could most of the time.
yeah.
So what you're doing, brother, is has the potential impact of just, it's unmeasurable, the impact it could make.
Yeah, and I think it feels sometimes backdoorish, right, to impacting the world around us. And oftentimes when I'm in my discipleship world, people look at me a little cockeyed because it's like they're used to focusing on the church. And I'm saying we're doing the same. We're just focusing more on when they're out there, versus when they're in there. And I think that's a really important thing. So when a pastor can catch the vision of this, it's been fun for me to watch the steps they begin to take because their preaching becomes a little bit different. The way that they honor people, like I will have business people say to me, because they're just sharp on that front. They love Jesus. The Spirit
Yeah.
of God is in them. And they'll say, Dave, sometimes it's just a bummer because the only way that we're drawn on in our local churches is giving. When
Yeah.
we have really some strong, and they're not banging their chest. They're just saying, I feel left out sometimes because like we're pretty strategic. We
Yeah.
have a pulse on the community we live in,
Yeah.
and it's true. And I think that's
So
where,
good.
yeah,
Yeah.
it's drawing on some of those societal leaders can provide great wisdom to the local church.
Or we go to the CEO and we're like, hey, do you want to serve in kids ministry? Not knowing what his background is. Not saying that that's bad. I'm not
Yeah,
saying a
no,
CEO shouldn't serve
exactly.
in kids
Yeah,
ministry,
yeah,
but the potential impact he could have over the organizational
yeah,
ability of the church could be significant.
yeah, yeah,
But we don't really, yeah, like you just said, we don't plug him in. I mean, one of the principles globally, Dave, of disciple making movements is releasing and equipping the priesthood of all believers, which is
yes,
what you're really talking about. Like, hey, every single one of us are called by God to be disciples who make disciples, no
yeah,
matter where we're at.
yeah,
And what does this look like if you're an engineer? What does it look like if you're a lawyer? What does it look like if you're a politician? What does it look like if you're in Hollywood or
yeah,
in a TV station or a news station or whatever? And that is such an important conversation because, 80% of our lives are spent, that may be a little bit too much, but a lot of our lives are spent in whatever vocation or job we have.
yeah,
9, 10 hours a day is going to be spent right there. And so
yeah,
how do we leverage that for the sake of the kingdom? It's a huge question, brother. So let me ask you, um, if there's people out there listening right now and they're like, man, we'd love to have a deeper conversation about this, or we'd love to kind of see what LionShare, how LionShare could come alongside of us. What are some pathways or programs or trainings or whatever it might be that you guys offer that people might be able to get plugged in with?
yeah. No, that's a great question. So people can visit our website. It's just lionshare.org.
Okay.
And there's an info at if there's something specific that they're looking for there. But a couple of the practical things that we do, if you are a leader listening to this, whether a pastor or societal leader, couple of things. One is we do every January to June something called a leadership journey. And we have people from around the country that come, and we do a retreat in January, a retreat in April. And then I ask people for 4 to 5 hours a week of things they watch, read, and listen to. And then every other week we jump on a Zoom call and process that together. So if somebody as a pastor or a leader is hearing this and they go, man, I need that. This is a pathway we've done since 2003 and has become a very effective. And it's kind of my focal point of discipling for the year. So that's one piece. Another piece is we do something called the leadership games. This is one of our pioneering pieces right now. We're in year 3 of it. Lauren taught me back in the day it takes 5 years to pioneer work. And so I've measured that in my 47 years of ministry and found that to be true. And so what the leadership games is, it's a strategic catalyst to connect people in their 40s to 70s with people in their 20s and 30s in a discipling relationship, both spiritually and vocationally. And so what we do is I've got about 25 to 30 leaders now that we're preparing for next July, when here in Nashville at Lipscomb University, we host the leadership games. They have vision for this kind of thing at that university. They said, just come use our campus. And we spend 4 days together where these young leaders in their 20s and 30s have experiences with the Lord through the scriptures and our tools on things like God's heart for you as a father. What does it mean to, speaking of the lordship issue, relinquish rights? And we give them opportunity to apply or to have hands put on their shoulders and words of life spoken into them by fathers. We talk about things like when you get up in the morning and you're brushing your teeth and get ready for the day, are you actually thinking about and preparing your heart for how Jesus may want to use you to advance the kingdom that day? And most of them just say no. And so we give them kind of, here's a line in the sand. Are you ready to cross this? And say, from this day forward. In the afternoons at the leadership games, we've created an imaginary city called Hebron Hills that has real life problems. The Lord showed us to help this next generation, we need to help them rehearse for the real. So we have this imaginary city where I have my societal leader friends develop what the real life problems are for Hebron Hills. And so on the first of the 4th days, we tell them about it and say, now you're going to have several hours each day in your vocational team with older leaders to solve these problems. And we're going to ask you to leave all your republicanisms and democratisms at the door. This is about Jesus and his ways from his word. How do we fix this? And it has blown their minds. And wow, they have just said, nobody's taught me to think this way. So the evenings, after a good afternoon break, the evenings deal with social issues. So in the last few years, we've dealt with race, gender identity, politics, AI, mental health. So if you're going to disciple the next generation, you have to disciple them spiritually, vocationally, and socially. And so we have a group of 40s to 70s who say, I got a heart for this. Some of them, to be honest, have said, I've never been discipled, and say, we got you on that. So we disciple them for a year with our tool. So by the time they are at the leadership games gathering, they are ready when the last day is there. The last thing we do is all those leaders divvy up the young people in their vocations. And so you might have 2 or 3 leaders with 4 or 5 young leaders. And for a year, they pour into them the things of God, and they become kind of their vocational answer person. Like, hey, my boss has been, but how do I handle this?
Yeah.
And so, whether it's someone listening and saying, man, I got some young leaders that need that, or whether as an older leader, you're going, I'm looking to do that, reach out to us and say, hey, tell me more about the leadership games. That'd be another thing we could help with.
Yeah, man, that's awesome. That sounds like something that I mean, just personally, I'd love to be there for that.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
let me know, Dave, when it's happening.
I will.
That sounds incredible. Well, thank you, brother. We're about out of time. But before we go, let me ask 2 things, Dave. Number one, you've already given the website, but what is kind of if somebody heard anything today that they're interested in, is that going to be the best way to get a hold of you? Just hop on the website.
They can do that, or excuse me, they can reach out to me, Dave at LionShare.org.
Okay.
And between me and my team, we're happy to respond and help in any way we can.
Okay, awesome. And then secondly, what would you recommend for a first step for somebody out there that's listening? Like, if they're really wanting to start getting engaged in this whole idea of impacting the societies or the different
Yeah.
spheres of society, what would be a first step or two that you would recommend that they begin to take?
Yeah. So there's a book that we've done it's called The Great Opportunity, and it's subtitled Making Disciples of Jesus in Every Vocation. And
Okay.
so if somebody's just saying, hey, that hits me in a good way, kind of tease me with a little bit more biblically. And so we get into the character of God and a number of things there. It's very practical. The first half is kind of more envisioning. The back half is actual practical steps to disciple people within your vocation. So that would probably be a great tool for people to get. And again, they'll find that on the website, The Great Opportunity.
The Great Opportunity. Awesome. Well, thank you, Dave. Man, it has been awesome to I wish we could chat more about this. This is so fascinating just to think and dream about what it looks like when the kingdom infiltrates different areas and different spheres and different vocations.
Yeah.
Man, I love your heart, love your passion, love your vision. And let's, man, together, all of us listening, continue to pray that prayer. Lord, may your kingdom come in every sphere of society so that we can see your kingdom reign on this earth the way that it does in heaven. Dave, thanks for being with us, brother. Really appreciate you. For those of you listening, like Dave said, check them out at LionShare.org. You can also find a lot of other disciple-making resources on so many different topics at Discipleship.org. Make sure you check it out there. We've got a lot of free ebooks, and definitely check out Dave's book as well, The Great Opportunity. It sounds like an amazing resource in order to get you started in this. But thanks, guys, for listening, and we really can't wait to see you next time. But until then, go out there. Let's be disciples who make disciples in every sphere of society until Jesus returns. God bless you guys. We'll see you soon.